Part 53. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 523. The beginning of the fourth episode just depicts the daily life of the bald male protagonist Saitama as he buys groceries, cooks and sleeps. This kind of plot should be classified as a boring plot that delays time among young hot-blooded comics. According to common sense, Yoshida, who is the editor-in-chief of a certain second-grade cartoonist, should have asked Gao Gao when he saw this kind of plot. Chiao Cheng suggested that this kind of plot should be greatly reduced. However, the monotonous and ordinary daily life in the comics, coupled with Saitama's inner monologue, had an impact on the observers, but it dispelled Yoshida's idea of persuading Takahashi Makoto to revise the manga manuscript. By the way, Yoshida still has not found the name of a certain bald male protagonist. In a sense, the manga that has been serialized for 3 chapters and is about to be serialized for the 4th chapter but still does not reveal the protagonist's name. In Yoshida's memory, I'm afraid I only have this comic called One Punch Man in my hand, right? The evil forces in this world seem to never disappear. Even after I became a hero because of my interest, the world has not changed much. In other words, I have not brought any impact to society. I don't feel sad about this. But now I have a trouble. My emotions are gradually disappearing day by day. I can no longer feel fear, tension, joy, and even anger. It's because I have gained power and put the most important thing in human beings. Have you exchanged your belongings? It can only be regarded as a daily plot, and there is obviously no exaggeration. However, it is such a simple monologue plot that makes Yoshida, who is observing comics, involuntarily immersed in it. In the past battles, my chest was always filled with various emotions, fear, anxiety, anger, but now, one punch can solve all battles. I returned home safe and sound and started washing my gloves. Facing the vaccine man who turned the city into ruins, the hero knocked him out with one punch. When fighting monsters, there is never any collision of souls. I just regard heroes as a hobby. Faced with the super monster who destroyed cities and killed humans, the hero still knocked him down with one punch. So, as long as I feel satisfied, that's enough. Without the foreshadowing of the previous 3 chapters, Yoshida might feel that Saitama's inner monologue is a bit exaggerated. However, combined with the contents of the 3 previously published chapters, just as a certain bald male protagonist said at the end of the 3rd chapter of the comic, having overwhelming power is a boring thing. Is this what Cheng said before, the awe and expectation for the unknown? Looking at the monologue of the male protagonist in the comic, Yoshida couldn't help but think of what Takahashi Makoto said at that time. It is human nature to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages, but because of the almost cheating method of predicting the future, humans only know how to pursue good things that are beneficial to themselves, intentionally and deliberately avoid things that are not good for themselves, or even things that are not good for them. It's a harmful thing. This does sound like a very touching and desirable idea, but is it really the case? Without experiencing setbacks and hardships, human beings will not have a heart of steel, and after that, their will become weak and their souls will gradually decay. Although such people seem to have plenty of food and clothing and a happy life on the surface, in fact they are just living like zombies. No, it should be said that when they first chose to go down this wrong path, the existence called human had already dead. So in a sense, having a person with such a high-sounding special ability as predicting the future is not a gift from God because he takes care of the protagonist, but a disaster, a curse that makes mankind despair. If you know everything about the future and what is about to happen, what meaning does a life like this have? Although Saitama, the male protagonist of the comic One Punch Man, does not have the ability to cheat like predicting the future, his ability to can solve any problem with one punch is actually the same as predicting the future. Not much different. According to Colonel Chu, the former is the embodiment of wisdom, while the latter is the perfect interpretation of power, nothing more. If you really can't be in awe of anything, it means that you no longer have expectations for anything. Is this still alive? No. This is just the arrogance of human inferiority. You have to be in awe of the unknown and have expectations for the unknown. Only then can you be living alive in the true sense. Speaking of, I am influenced by Chang, right? Yoshida put down the comic manuscript, pondered for a moment, and then smiled wryly. It's just a comic, other readers will never be like me when they read comics. In this way, I started to feel about life inexplicably. Sure enough, I had so many boring thoughts just now because that guy Chang always said some weird things. Although Yoshida laughs at himself very quietly, but don't forget that it is very quiet at Makoto Takahashi's house at the moment because he is worried about disturbing the rest of a certain secondary manga artist. So, Yoshida, have you forgotten about Uncle Tintin who is finishing the manga draft next to you? Now, Uncle Tintin, is it necessary to cover your mouth to suppress laughter? Don't just smile at this time, it's okay to laugh as much as you want. Because he suddenly recalled what Takahashi Makoto said before, Yoshida's attention became less focused when observing the comics, but this is only a temporary thing. As a qualified editor in charge, how could he interfere with his work because of such a small interruption? So, Yoshida took a deep breath, put aside the many complicated thoughts in his mind, and continued to observe the remaining comics in his hand. However, in the comics, the sleeping male protagonist was suddenly awakened by the explosion, and before the male protagonist could react, he was grabbed by a giant hand that broke through the wall and thrown out fiercely. His underground people? They actually wiped out nearly 70% of humans. And they also injured this male protagonist who was so powerful that he broke through the sky. After just observing for a moment, Yoshida was a little uneasy. Hey, this is a great way to unfold. What are these underground people? Have you seen the part about the decisive battle with the underground people? Listening to Yoshida mumbling about the plot of the comic, Uncle Ding Ding stopped his brush, looked up at Yoshida with sympathy, and then turned his eyes to the original version comic manuscript piled next to him. To be precise, it should be the page of comic manuscript with a special mark. Then, according to what Chang said, I always feel that it's a bit too much to trick Yoshida like this. Ahahaha. Hey, Ding Ding San, did Chang say anything to you before? Yoshida suddenly put down the comic manuscript and asked Uncle Ding Ding. That. Uncle Ding Ding was still struggling whether to follow Takahashi Makoto's previous arrangement and trick Yoshida. Did Chang say that the style of this comic needs to change? Although Yoshida asked Uncle Ding Ding, his firm tone seemed to have seen through the truth. The underground people who appeared in the second half of this comic manuscript wiped out nearly 70% of humans. This means that the following plot will become a common routine in many comics, such as the bald male protagonist leading humans to resist the underground people. Such a brutal imagination. Should we say that Yoshida is worthy of being an experienced editor-in-chief? The content of the fourth episode of the comic One Punch Man is actually not very complicated. In simple terms, it is just a dream of the male protagonist Saitama. And under the instruction of Makoto Takahashi, the last page of the comic manuscript hidden by Uncle Tintin is the key page that reveals all powerful enemies are dreams. In this regard, Yoshida did not make the right choice and did not notice Uncle Tintin's small movements, thus triggering the key comic manuscript was hidden event. So Yoshida, a middle school cartoonist and a coerced assistant, have seen the ending of your being pitted. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 524. When facing a vaccine man with powerful lethality, a certain bald male protagonist defeated the opponent with one punch, and naturally there was no problem of injury. When facing a supergiant, a certain bald male protagonist was thrown to the ground by the opponent, and withstood many consecutive attacks, but in the end he was still unscathed and counterattacked with one punch. However, this time, when faced with a sudden attack by the underground people, the bald male protagonist was actually injured. Although it was only a minor injury, even though it was just a little bloody like a gangster fighting, it is undeniable that a certain bald male protagonist was really injured this time. Based on the contents of the previous series, it seems that the fighting power of this group of underground people is a bit exaggerated. I saw a certain bald male protagonist who was injured in the comic, and looked at the underground people emerging from the underground one after another in the comic. Yoshida, who was already firmly attracted by the plot of the comic, couldn't help frowning and sighing, and the number of these people called underground people, is it too exaggerated by visual inspection? Unlike many other shonen comics, in the comic One Punch Man, when Saitama faced the underground man, he did not use the mouth gun skill common to the protagonist, but directly punched him. What are you? After defeating an underground man with one punch, Saitama looked at the underground men surrounding him and asked seriously. We are underground people. One of the taller underground people stood in front of the bald male protagonist and began to tell the origin and purpose of the underground people. Every time a new enemy appears, he will explain his origin and purpose. Although it is very good in terms of attracting readers, but after reading the self-introduction of the underground man, Yoshida sighed helplessly. With a sound, he started to perform the long-awaited three-stage complaint. Why are the origins of these weirdos so weird? Why do they always have weird characters? Even if they are villains, if you give me a good design, will they die? Originally, Yoshida thought that the original version of the manga draft was done by Makoto Takahashi at will. After all, the manga of One Punch Man serialized in the Weekly Shonen Jump is similar in plot, but the style of painting is better than that. The so-called original version is so much better, but now when Yoshida saw the manga draft of the fourth episode, he realized that he was too naive. Putting aside the plot of this comic, the character design of this comic still follows the randomness of the original version. Needless to say, there is no need to say more about a certain bald male protagonist, whether it's that kind of smiley face, or the character of interest makes you a hero, or the weird bald head, and the shabby clothes. Speaking of the fact that he could insist on watching the fourth episode before starting to complain, in a sense, Yoshida really feels that he is already very powerful. Then there are the weirdos who belong to the villain camp. The Vaccine Man, this weird villain who got a lunch as soon as he appeared on the scene, naturally made Yoshida complain about him because he looked like the big devil Piccolo. And the crab weirdo who prompted the transformation of the bald male protagonist actually came from eat too many crabs, therefore, the mutation occurred this kind of character, and the supergiant that followed was even more outrageous. After drinking a test tube potion, he became like that, and also used Luffy Kun's famous tricks. It can be said that the comic won. The various villains and weirdos that appear in Fighting Man are all quite random, and they are all quite weird. After suppressing the power of complaining in his heart, Yoshida concentrated his attention for a while and continued to observe the comic manuscript in his hand. After all, as a qualified editor, he cannot just complain about the comics and forget about it like the readers do. Your own responsibility. Originally, Yoshida thought that there would be no battle plot in the fourth episode. After all, according to the style of many shounen comics, as well as the deceptive style of a certain middle-aged cartoonist in the past, this kind of plot usually occurs, that is, when a fierce battle is about to begin, it will be forcibly interrupted and stuck, and the progress will be full of bad taste, the behavior of whetting one's appetite to obtain pleasure. Originally Yoshida thought so. Huh? This plot development. However, sometimes veteran drivers will drive the wrong car and take the wrong road. No, it should be said that they are experienced editors who sometimes make common sense mistakes. For example, the content of the fourth chapter of the comic One Punch Man did not end with the appearance of the underground man, and a certain second-level cartoonist did not delay the fierce battle that Yoshida expected until the next chapter. In the content, he didn't blindly ask why the other party wanted to eliminate human beings, nor did he accuse the other party of cruel methods when annihilating human beings and cities, nor was he able to bear it because he sympathized with the underground people's suffering. He punched the underground person standing in front of him. Man, after listening to what the other party said, a certain bald male protagonist did not talk nonsense with the underground man, but chose to have sex directly. Now that we know that the two sides are hostile, there is nothing to say. We will not be afraid of the enemy's large number, nor will we shrink from the opponent's exaggerated combat power. The punch that blew the underground man apart was nothing but a punch. In addition to being used by a certain bald male protagonist to declare war on the underground people, the more important role is to echo the content of the first half of the fourth episode, that is, to imply the meaning of fighting a powerful enemy happily. After all, the underground people who were able to wipe out 70% of the human race in a short period of time were definitely very powerful beings in every sense of the word. Facing this big bald man who suddenly popped up, the underground people did not talk about the so-called chivalry with Saitama, and started to attack him like a pack of wolves. Although Saitama can kill any underground person who comes up to him with one punch, facing hundreds or thousands of underground people, Saitama cannot kill them all in a short time. As a result, the next plot of the comic becomes a common one-on-one mode in the Dynasty Warriors series. Of course, after killing 1,000 underground people, Saitama will definitely not get such things as "Your Excellency, it's the real Dynasty Warriors" and other amazing comments. The short underground man, when facing Saitama, whether he used his life to block Saitama's fist or used his life to delay time, he fully displayed his role as cannon fodder, and the giant underground man, because of their role as cannon fodder, they can naturally bring enough damage to Saitama. Although the battle against a group of people is a bit over-exaggerated to the sky-breaking force value of an individual, it has to be said that many readers have very high expectations for such a plot, but in the end, it is expected that the individual will fight against the enemy. It's hard to tell whether he's going to perform a gorgeous unparalleled dance, or whether he's expecting a powerful individual to be overwhelmed by the crowd tactics. Although he has not finished reading the fourth chapter of the comic One Punch Man, Yoshida's face is filled with excitement, because as the editor-in-chief, Yoshida finally found the secret in the manga manuscript of this chapter. The unique style of this comic. If they disagree, they will start fighting. If they disagree, they will pick a group of people, and if they disagree, they will punch to death. This is the true style of the comic One Punch Man. Well, dear readers, Happy New Year's Eve. Also, I wish you a happy spring festival in advance. I wish all readers the best in the new year. Above. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 525. When observing the comic One Punch Man until the fourth episode, Yoshida finally found the style of this comic from the comic manuscript. Whether as an editor-in-chief or just a reader, for Yoshida, this is something worth celebrating. But whether it is inexplicable excitement or overexcitement, before reading the comic manuscript, Yoshida will not make comments on the comic One Punch Man casually because of his overly excited mood. This is not only what an editor-in-chief who has awakened the soul of editor-in-chief should do, but more importantly, Yoshida's intuitive instinct awakened by Takahashi Makoto's long-term training is constantly warning Yoshida, so that Yoshida can feel that the ominous premonitions such as making comments before reading the comic manuscript may not be punished by heaven, but will definitely be killed by Takahashi Makoto have been entangled around his body like an evil ghost curse. With a self-deprecating expression on his face, Yoshida shook his head gently, trying to dispel the many complicated thoughts in his mind, and then concentrated his attention and carefully read the remaining fourth chapter of the comic manuscript in his hand. It's not that the existence called editor's soul in his body began to burn because of the comic manuscript. Yoshida just felt that a certain middle school manga artist who always liked to suddenly stop the plot at a critical point in the development of the comics actually didn't use the crazy skill of godlike card plot to whet people's appetite this time, so, this is just a recognition of Takahashi Makoto's sudden conscience behavior, that's all. By the way, Yoshida's awakening of the Tsundere attribute is definitely not the awakening of the Tsundere attribute. Although it is said that after possessing the attributes of Black Belly and Venomous Tongue, awakening the Tsundere attribute can raise the cuteness of the character to an exaggerated level, but for an uncle who has been single for many years and is even preparing to hit the god of singles, this character attribute is not a match at all. After all, the cuteness of the uncle attribute is used to show mature charm instead of being cute. In the second half of the fourth episode of the comic One Punch Man, facing the besiege of a large number of underground people, a bald male protagonist without any reinforcements, no matter how powerful he had shown before, was finally knocked away by an unexpected punch after killing many underground people. As the bald male protagonist continued to fly backwards, the scenery along the way, no, it should be that the buildings along the way were like shoddy construction, shattered and destroyed. This one-on-one battle ended with a violent explosion, causing the bald male protagonist to be trapped in the explosion and his life or death unknown. It's over, but who is that guy on the ground? Facing the bald male protagonist who was caught in the explosion, the underground people who luckily survived the battle were amazed at the fighting power shown by the bald male protagonist, and couldn't help but start to be curious about his true identity. After all, for this group of underground people who wiped out 70% of the human race in a very short period of time, it is impossible not to be curious that among the humans who were slaughtered, a bald man with extraordinary fighting power suddenly appeared, and he also killed many of his own kind. I am a hero driven by interest. The ragged figure slowly moved forward in the ruins, and under the onlookers of the underground people, he gradually walked out of the ruins of the exploding and burning city. I will not lose. The muscular body was covered with scars. In addition to the iconic bald head that could indicate his identity, what surprised Yoshida the most or shocked him was naturally the earth. I will protect it. He clenched his right fist and hit his chest hard, and a roar like venting his domineering power sounded. Perhaps this is the awareness of being a hero? Or it could be said that a true hero showed his will that could shake the world. No matter how many enemies there are, or how strong or weak they are, for a bald male protagonist, it is just a matter of one punch. This may be the origin of the name of the comic One Punch Man, and it is also the main fighting method of a bald male protagonist in this comic. Originally, after Yoshida learned about this setting from a middle school cartoonist, he once thought about persuading Takahashi Makoto to change and revise this invincible setting. After all, the invincible setting of only one punch is needed to solve the enemy is indeed very good and passionate at first glance, but as the comic gradually unfolds, this unchanging setting has become a limitation on the development of this comic. However, now Yoshida feels that he underestimated Takahashi Makoto, and also underestimated this comic called One Punch Man. A bald male protagonist fought with the underground man again. The scene of this fight still continued the previous style. Although a bald man still knocked down the underground man with one punch like before, however, Yoshida still watched with shortness of breath and relish. When Takahashi Makoto finished the fourth chapter of the comic, he used a lot of split shots to show the bald male protagonist's sky-high fighting power, and drew this battle vividly, combined with the previous declaration of justice of protect the earth. What's more, during the battle between the bald male protagonist and the underground people, he also added some inner monologues of the male protagonist. What is this feeling? What is this fiery heartbeat? This crisis, this tension. This long forgotten, this, high fighting spirit. A one-on-one battle that was short and ended quickly. A certain bald male protagonist stood in the ruins of the city strewn with corpses of underground people, looking up at the sky, although the battle that ended so quickly was a bit regretful for Yoshida, as an observer, but that was all. But it made Yoshida, the editor-in-chief, nod in praise. However, the fourth chapter of the comic does not end here. Yes, I remembered it. This is it. Oh, 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 you took care of my children. Just when a certain bald male protagonist was recalling the battle just now, a huge underground man suddenly rushed out of the ground. Let me, the underground king, be your opponent. This is what I want. As the underground king of the underground, for a certain bald male protagonist, he is exactly what he has been looking for, an opponent who can make him feel the passion for fighting again. So, a certain bald male protagonist did not have any fear of the new underground king. Instead, he showed an expectant smile and raised his fist to hit the opponent. No, no more. Just when Yoshida took a deep breath and prepared to observe the next battle, he discovered that the manga manuscript of chapter 4 in his hand was no longer there. This guy Aiken, stuck the plot at such a critical position again. This guy did it on purpose. He definitely did this on purpose. Unparalleled fighting with a group, the righteousness of protecting the earth, and the fighting spirit that burns after finding the opponent. Originally, any one of them could be used as a theme to ignite the enthusiasm of observers, but now it is all covered by a certain comic book. The families are superimposed together in a crazy way. Isn't it natural for Yoshida to be so obsessed with such a plot? Therefore, for Yoshida, who is already addicted to the manga manuscript, to have the plot stuck in this place, it is definitely a mental torture that can be remembered for a lifetime. I've been a bit busy during this period and haven't updated at all. A certain cat apologizes to all readers. By the way, a certain cat's writing skills are not good enough to write the blood-heated battle scenes like Saitama Sansan's, let alone the foul music in the animation. Tisk, this feeling of unwillingness is really annoying me out. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 526. I was wrong, I was really wrong. He smiled helplessly and kept repeating words like this. This was Yoshida's reaction after reading the fourth chapter of the manga in his hand. Originally, when Yoshida saw a certain bald male protagonist dueling with an underground man, he accidentally observed the follow-up content of the comic. He thought that a middle-class cartoonist finally realized his conscience and finally stopped the crazy plot this time. However, Yoshida, it wasn't until I looked at the last page of the comic manuscript in my hand that I realized that a certain second-grade cartoonist was not a conscientious discovery at all, but something even worse. Because the content on the last page of the manga manuscript in his hand is about a certain bald male protagonist who has defeated countless underground people and is preparing for the critical moment of a decisive battle with the leader of the underground people, the Underground King, and the fourth chapter of One Punch Man in Yoshida's hand. The comic manuscript just ends here. Although from the perspective of the editor in charge, the content of the fourth episode is designed like this. It will make readers look forward to the next fifth episode even more. Yoshida really felt a little melancholy at this moment, and looked at the onlookers. Uncle Ding Ding sighed, but as the first reader to observe the comic manuscript, it is really uncomfortable to have the comic plot stuck at this position. Yes, Uncle Ding Ding, who was obviously a bit uninformed, did not dare to look directly at Yoshida's unsatisfied eyes at this moment, perhaps because of his guilty conscience. He only dared to whisper in agreement from the side, "A Cheng is like this, a Cheng's doing this is indeed a bit deceptive." Tisk, it's just a bit, to this extent? Humph, Yoshida snorted dissatisfiedly at Uncle Tintin's euphemistic remarks, then picked up the comic manuscript of chapter 4, frowned and asked Uncle Tintin, "Speak of Tintin. Jisang, when you were finishing the manga, didn't you notice that in the fourth chapter of the manga, there were 2 images of the bald male protagonist?" 2 images, Uncle Tintin repeated Yoshida's question doubtfully, and after thinking for a moment, he showed a look of surprise. "Oh, Yoshida-kun refers to the different face shapes of the front half and back half of the bald male protagonist, right?" Let me look for it. That's it. Yoshida quickly flipped through the comic manuscript in his hand and found two close-ups of the male protagonist with obviously different drawing styles. Look at this comic manuscript, the male protagonist looks like this face shape, then you look at this comic manuscript, the male protagonist changes into another face shape when fighting. Although both face shapes have the iconic bald head, it will not confuse readers of the comic, but I'm curious as to why Aiken would want to paint like this. Those are underdrawing mode and serious mode. According to Chen, these are the dual modes unique to the male protagonist. Seeing the increasingly ugly look on Yoshida's face, Uncle Tintin rationally chose to gradually turn down the volume. Huh? Under twitching mode and serious mode? Dual modes unique to the protagonist. Although Uncle Tintin's voice became lower and lower as he spoke, Yoshida, who was focused, could still hear it clearly, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Either draw them all in serious mode, or, tisk, you have to mix these two styles together. What the hell is that guy Aiken doing? Contrast is cute, that's how Chen explained it at the beginning. As an assistant to a middle-level cartoonist, Uncle Tintin, who assisted in completing the comic draft of One Punch Man, naturally knows more than Yoshida, who is the editor in charge. This is a victory for information access. Contrasting cuteness, Yoshida's mouth twitched as if he couldn't stop it. Sure enough, had he eaten food from a brand known as Can't Stop before coming here? Not to mention that in this episode, I didn't notice the cuteness of the male protagonist at all. By the way, both of the two different face shapes are bald, right? No matter it is lesser mode or serious mode, it is just a bald head, that's it? Such a weird setting. How on earth does that guy Cheng have the confidence to call this contrast cuteness? Yoshida-san, I think you'd better keep your voice down. Seeing that Yoshida seemed to be getting more and more excited, Uncle Tintin turned a little nervously in a certain direction. After seeing that the closed door showed no signs of opening, breathed a long sigh of relief, pointed to the door and whispered to Yoshida, "You must know that in that room, the legendary arrogant Demon King Shu is sleeping. If he accidentally awakens Demon King Shu from his sleep..." Hey! Tintin-ji-san, you are really a coward? You are so worthless. That's right, but Yoshida, your body is shaking unconsciously, and your voice has been gradually lowered. How qualified are you to do this? Say. Speaking of Yoshida-san, the manga manuscript for Chapter 4, do you think there is anything that needs to be revised? Uncle Tintin picked up a piece of notepaper from the table and asked Yoshida while preparing to start recording. In order to be able to finish the fourth chapter of the comic manuscript in a short time, Chen has been busy rushing the manuscript and basically never had a good rest, so if there is anything that needs to be modified, I will record it and wait until Cheng. I'll tell you this after Chen wakes up. Ding-ding-ji-san, you have really helped me a lot. Responsible assistants like you are so rare. This is not a compliment, but a truly heartfelt compliment from Yoshida. As the editor-in-chief of the weekly Shounen Jump, Yoshida naturally met many cartoonist assistants when he came into contact with many cartoonists. Most assistants of cartoonists will basically not do anything extra after they have completed their own work, that is, after they have finished drawing the cartoon manuscript that they need to assist. The assistant helps the cartoonist stay up late to complete the cartoon manuscript, or is responsible for temporarily replacing the cartoonist to communicate with the editor. Although things like this are not absolutely unheard of in reality, they are only rare events. Of course, the premise of the above-mentioned situations is that the assistant is willing. As for the cartoonist paying compensation to achieve these achievements, this is already within the category of equivalent exchange and does not fall into the category mentioned before. A small probability event. Therefore, Uncle Tintin can indeed be named Best Assistant of the Year. There are no major problems with the manga manuscript. After Yoshida once again looked through the content of the fourth chapter in his hand, he said to Uncle Tintin, "No, it is not so much that Yoshida is talking to Uncle Tintin, it is better to say that Yoshida is, because the comic draft turned on the complaint mode. This is already the fourth episode, right? It's already the fourth episode, right? But what is the name of the bald male protagonist and how should he be called? That guy Aiken didn't reveal any content in the comic. And more importantly, the plot of the fourth episode is a bit weird. Weird, Uncle Tintin recorded the word Yoshida, gritted his teeth and asked with some confusion, why does Yoshida-san feel like this? The content of the first 3 chapters of the comic One Punch Man should be classified as comedy comics in terms of style, but the 4th chapter has added a lot of passionate battle scenes. Yoshida said while sorting out the manga manuscript. He said with some confusion, although it is not a big problem to add some hot-blooded battle content to funny comics, but in the plot content of the 4th episode, 70% of human beings are extinct. This development is not only somewhat unexpected and somewhat inconsistent with the previous style. This is indeed a bit, ahaha, it turns out that this is what you think is weird, Yoshida-san. In order to suppress the complicated expression on his face, Uncle Tintin turned his head unnaturally, and after pondering for a moment, he whispered. He asked Yoshida, who was already confused, well, Yoshida-san, what if the manga manuscript in your hand is not the complete 4th chapter? It's not complete, Nani, after Yoshida exclaimed, an unbelievable look appeared on his face. Could it be the comic manuscript for the 4th chapter of the comic One Punch Man? Here is another one. Uncle Tintin pulled out a relatively new comic manuscript from a thick stack of original version comics. He handed it to Yoshida, who was completely silent, and explained with some difficulty, according to Cheng's original words, the reason why I deliberately hide this page of comic manuscript is because you look down on the original version of my familiar cat. The result is roughly like this. A certain editor was silent. Aiken said that if Yoshida-san fell silent after knowing this, I just need to tell you. After Uncle Ding was entangled for a moment, he still very responsibly conveyed Takahashi Makoto's original words. Yoshida, this is all. This is all Stein's, Gates' choice, right? Like a conditioned reflex, Yoshida picked up what Uncle Tintin had not finished, then took a deep breath, and then entered the legendary explosive hair mode. I knew it would be like this, I should have known it would be like this. Hundan. The chirping is so noisy. Tintin Gi-san and my companion cat, have you guys reached a certain moment when hormone secretion is strong? The closed door was suddenly opened, and Takahashi Makoto had a dark face. He looked angrily at his assistant Uncle Tintin and editor-in-chief Yoshida. There is no doubt that because of Yoshida's out-of-control rampage just now, the second Demon King in a certain school was awakened from his slumber. Cheng, why don't you take a little more rest? After exchanging glances with Uncle Tintin, Yoshida immediately changed the topic and began to prepare to divert Takahashi Makoto's attention. I know you stayed up late to finish the manga. Writing is very tiring and hard, so I'm just about to leave. Huh? Are you ready to leave, my cat? Makoto Takahashi let out a long yawn, then his eyes fell on the comic page in Yoshida's hand, with a knowing smile on his face. So it turns out that's it? What? Looking at Makoto Takahashi's smile, Yoshida, who was about to escape, suddenly had some kind of ominous premonition. My beloved cat, it seems that Tintin Gi-san has given you the key page of the manga manuscript. Makoto Takahashi said to himself after his eyes wandered between Uncle Tintin and Yoshida for a moment. He stood up and said, but my familiar cat, are you sure that the comic manuscript in your hand is the last page of chapter 4? Will there be more later? This time it was Uncle Tintin's turn to be surprised, but when I finished that page of comic manuscript, Cheng, didn't you say that all the content of the 4th chapter was completed? From the time sequence of the completion of the comics, the page of comics you completed, Ding Ding Ji-san, does represent the completion of the content of the 4th episode. Takahashi Makoto snapped his fingers and showed a happy smile on his face. But when did I say that the page of comics you completed, Ding Ding Ji-san, is the final comics of the 4th episode? It seems, I really didn't say that. Uncle Ding Ding recalled the original scene, and his eyes became a little weird when he looked at Takahashi Makoto, and asked in disbelief, could it be that Ah-Chang, you have already drawn the ending of the 4th episode in advance before I finished that page of comics? Ding Ding Ji-san, you will hand over the comics to my cat who has not achieved task achievement in advance because of some special reasons. Although Takahashi Makoto did not explain in detail, but this is already regarded as tacitly accepting Uncle Ding Ding's speculation, right? I didn't let my cat go through a mission trial, nor did I let my cat go through a death situation to overcome my demons, humph. I expected your betrayal. Betrayal, Uncle Ding Ding's mouth twitched at the word used by Makoto Takahashi, so, you, Cheng. Of course. Because of me. Makoto Takahashi pulled his white coat and laughed. The crazy cartoonist Feng Guangai Yuan Kuma has already observed everything through Stein's gate. Ha 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 ha. I'm sorry to all readers. Recently, something happened at a certain cat's home. I didn't update or explain it in time. I'm really sorry. The matter has not been completely resolved yet, but it's almost done, so the update should be back to normal. I'm really sorry. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 527. Whether 70% of the human race is extinct, whether a group of underground people can fight as well as the bald male protagonist, or even the underground king who looks super powerful in the end, everything told before the 4th chapter of the comic One Punch Man, are actually just the dreams of a certain bald male protagonist. After the real underground king appeared in the comics, he just had time to make some arrogant remarks before he was kicked to death by the bald male protagonist who was looking forward to the battle. I became too strong. Not realizing that the underground king was not as powerful as in his dream, a certain bald male protagonist's heart that was expecting a passionate battle instantly cooled down, and he sighed helplessly. And this is also the comic One Punch, the end of the comic manuscript for the 4th episode of Superman. The fierce battle, the passionate declaration to protect the Earth, all this is just the absurd dream of a certain bald male protagonist. After the release of the weekly Shonen Jump that published the 4th chapter of the comic One Punch Man, many readers who read this chapter felt a sense of being emotionally deceived. Of course, a certain responsibility, the editor and a certain uncle's assistant, as the original observers of the 4th comic draft, were naturally the first to be tricked and killed. But, despite this, the 4th chapter of the comic One Punch Man still achieved good results. At least that result can make Yoshida feel a little relieved, and then spend most of his time supervising and urging the little sea otter. There. Master Phoenix Academy God, you have actually reached the 2nd place this time. Little Sea Otter was finishing the comic draft with a look of envy, jealousy, and longing on his face. If only I could achieve this level. Mr. Yoshida, can you let me rest for a while? Well, you can think about it. Yoshida folded his hands on his chest, stood behind the little sea otter, with a devilish smile on his face, and said in a condescending tone, but if you want to rest, at least I have to get decent results. Here American, do you have any problem with me making such a request? I understand, Mr. Yoshida. In order to be able to rest for a long time, and in order to be able to live a sweet two-person life with Yuri-chan, I will work hard to write this chapter in the manga, said the little sea otter. Everything is burning, is this an illusion? Or should we praise the power of love as so great? Yeah, very good, here American, just keep working hard with this momentum. Although Yoshida was very satisfied with the sudden high-spirited performance of the little sea otter, as the editor-in-chief of the little sea otter, Yoshida also I know deeply that the little sea otter can only maintain this state for a moment at most, as expected, as Takahashi Makoto said, geniuses such as the little sea otter, no matter whether they are in a high-spirited state or a handsome statement. The degree of sustainability is long. It won't be long. Yoshida, shun, by the way. So, Only 10 minutes passed. The little sea otter, who was still very motivated just now, suddenly stopped painting after finishing half a page of the comic manuscript. This was a rare moment. IQ was on the line and asked Yoshida, if the next chapter of my manga can achieve good results, how long can I rest? 2 years. Huh? 2 years. Hearing the rest period proposed by the little sea otter, Yoshida almost bit his tongue, and then Yoshida stretched out his hands and grabbed the little sea otter's head tightly, making it impossible for the fearful little sea otter to escape. With his own gaze, he said word by word in a gloomy tone, 2 days, that is impossible. If you do well, I can give you a day off at most, that's all. One day? The time to rest, only 1 day. After hearing the news, the little sea otter seemed to be petrified. It was only after a long time that he realized that he had broken away from the shackles of a certain editor. Then he leaned on the tatami with a look of despair on his face. He covered his chest with one hand and supported his body with the other, and began to lament his miserable fate. I have worked so hard to complete a huge amount of manga manuscripts, but I can only get 1 day's rest. I am indeed the Yoshida clan slave. Ah, I can't, my chest is starting to hurt. Ah, I can't. My head started to hurt, Yoshida, I feel that my body is really failing. If I don't take a good rest for a while, I might really die. Don't worry, Hiramaru-kun. The human body is not that fragile. After watching the little sea otter's poor performance with a smile on his face, Yoshida dragged the little sea otter who was trying to escape to the desk, with a strange expression on his face. With a smile, words of temptation like a devil began to ring in the ears of the little sea otter. Do you want to take a good rest? Do you want a long vacation? Do you want to spend some sweet time with Miss Kangshuhong, a carefree life? Hiramaru-kun, work hard to finish the manga, and until the manga is serialized, you will have a long time to rest and live the life you hoped for and even dreamed of. Yes, that's it. Then what if? Little sea otter picked up the paintbrush. After pondering for a moment, he gritted his teeth and asked Yoshida about the plan he had just suddenly thought of. What if my comics are because of if your grades are not good and you are cut off in half at the serialization meeting? Hiramaru-kun, stop joking. Yoshida was a little angry at the little sea otter's idea, and couldn't help roaring, you must know that the comic you are serializing now has not received any recognition from the beginning to the end. Although the ranking is stable from beginning to end, it means that readers are looking forward to this comic. If you plan to lower the standard of this comic, or even get cut in half, if you do this, don't you really feel guilty? Don't you have any sense of shame as a cartoonist? No, are you even giving up your dignity? No, Mr. Yoshida, I just want to rest. Is that so? Hiramaru-kun, do you really think so? Seeing the little sea otter start to flinch, Yoshida showed a strange smile on his face, and changed to a more tactful rhetoric, but maybe for the little sea otter, as far as sea otters are concerned, what Yoshida said next may not be considered tactful at all. If Mr. Hiramaru has such an idea, then I am here to make a prediction that Miss Kangshuhong will eventually leave you, because Mr. Hiramaru like that is not worthy of Miss Kangshuhong at all. Why, how could it be? Yuri-chan will never. Upon hearing Yoshida's cruel prophecy, or vicious curse, the little sea otter's face instantly turned pale, and he clutched Yoshida's trouser legs with both hands. His face Shang's smile was a little stiff. Ahaha, Yoshida, you are lying to me. You are definitely lying to me. Yuri-chan will never. Humph. So what? Yoshida looked down at the little sea otter and said slowly in a calm tone, it is human nature to worship the strong. Women look forward to strong men because they can gain from each other enough sense of security, but Hiramaru-kun, if you don't think about making progress all day long and don't have any ambition, then you won't be able to bring enough security to Miss Kangshuhong. Hey, Hiramaru-kun. Maybe there is no problem for a day or two, but in the long run, do you think Kang Shuhong will leave you because he is disappointed in you, or because he lacks a sense of security? This. A samurai can give up his sword for the sake of world peace, and by the same token, a cartoonist can also pick up his paintbrush and fight for love. Because of the influence of a certain middle-class cartoonist, he originally only had the vicious tongue skill. A certain editor-in-chief of finally awakened the legendary talk skill this time. Here American, for the sake of your beloved Aoki Kurane, no, for your Yuri-chan, work hard to complete the manga manuscript and fight like a man. Yoshida. The little sea otter burst into tears at Yoshida's sudden words. Here American, I am not only your editor, but also your partner and friend, right? Yoshida hid the flash of joking in his eyes very well, and said to the little sea otter seriously, today, I will take advantage of the opportunity. I will tell you this only when Miss Kang Shuhong is not around. As an editor, I certainly hope that you can become a very popular cartoonist in the weekly Shonen Jump, and as your partner and friend, I hope you can be happy even more, here American. So, come on, here American. Well, I will definitely finish the comic manuscript of this comic carefully until the day when the serialization ends, for sure. After wiping away his tears, the little sea otter picked up the brush and sat at the desk, ready to start completing the comic manuscript. Very good. In this way, here American can work hard to draw the content of 3 chapters again, right? Looking at the little sea otter carefully completing the manga manuscript, Yoshida, like a supervisor, folded his arms in front of his chest and thought to himself. He stood up and said, sure enough, according to the method Cheng said, I can really control and drive here American. In this way, all my hard work in reciting this nonsense rhetoric will not be in vain. Sure enough, Makoto Takahashi is the mastermind behind everything. Yoshida, I will complete the manga manuscript seriously, although he didn't know that he was being plotted. According to the setting of the big universe, the little sea otter still felt a chill. He turned around and looked at Yoshida, who was meditating over there. The little sea otter said this while finishing the comic draft. Good attitude. But here American. Yoshida adopted the communication mode of praising first and then disparaging towards the little sea otter. You have to be more ashamed. Try to finish the 5-page comic today. 5 pages, the little sea otter was startled by the number Yoshida said, and immediately cried out, no, no, no. Gee, Yoshida, do you want to squeeze my life into dregs? Hey, here American, don't forget your original intention. Yoshida put his hand on the little sea otter's shoulder and said with a smile, all of this is to protect your beloved Yuri-chan. Seeing the little sea otter's body suddenly trembled, he stopped talking as if he had resigned himself to his fate, and began to draw the comic manuscript honestly and conscientiously. A satisfied smile appeared on Yoshida's face. Feeling this intoxicating feeling, now Yoshida is a little bit. You can understand why Takahashi Makoto likes collecting the so-called pleasure so much. Because this feeling is indeed very pleasant and addictive. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 528. In the editorial headquarters of the weekly Shonen Jump, editor Aida, who had just finished communicating with new cartoonists, when he returned to the office, he actually saw a colleague who rarely appeared in the office because he was usually very busy. Yoshida-kun, it's rare that you are in the office today when you are free. Editor Aida put the document bag on the table, looked at Yoshida with some surprise, and teased in a teasing tone, by the way, you don't have to go to Hiramaru today. Is there a need for me to work as a supervising supervisor for Hiramaru-sensei to complete the manga? Or, as my familiar cat, I don't need to go to Phoenix-sensei to receive special training. Searched can on Google. Here American will be completing the manga manuscripts honestly in the recent period, so you no longer have to work around the clock like before. Sitting in the editorial office, Yoshida took a sip of tea and sighed to Aida, and the most important thing is that during this period of time, that Guy Cheng has rarely been able to stay at home and complete comic manuscripts. This kind of peaceful daily life has been a long time coming for me. Oh? Is that so? That's really gratifying. Editor Aida stared at Yoshida with a smile, and cursed Yoshida viciously as if talking to himself, but having said that, it's rare for Phoenix Academy teacher to be quiet. For a while, could it be that he was secretly planning some shocking and cruel plan? Tisk, Aida-san, we are all editors in charge, do you intend to hurt each other with me by doing this? After Yoshida complained and teased editor Aida, he immediately turned his attention to the document bag on Aida's desk. He asked with interest, how about the newcomer who just submitted a manuscript? Aida-san, you actually went to negotiate in person. It seems that soon, there will be another new work with great potential in the weekly serialization. Not at all, editor Aida sighed helplessly. Although affected by the animation broadcast of the comic Dream Eater, the number of new submissions has increased a lot recently, but there are still potentials like those of Ajuma Menha. The newcomers are hard to find. This time, the comic quality of the newcomers can only be regarded as average. Even if they try hard, they can still be serialized. However, considering the number of serializations in the weekly during the recent period, the quality of the comics, in order not to dampen the enthusiasm of the newcomers, and in order not to kill the hopes of the newcomers, in the end I politely rejected the kids' comic draft. Hey, editor Aida is really a good person. It was obviously a compliment, but Yoshida's tone didn't sound like a compliment at all. In other words, Yoshida's tone was a return gift to editor Aida just now, right? Although his tone was full of unkind praise, Yoshida did not think that his colleague editor Aida did too much. Originally, according to the criteria for selecting comics for weekly magazines in the past, there are naturally many comics manuscripts that have appeared in recent times that can be serialized. However, the editors of the weekly magazine only gave up the attempt after trying to adopt 2 new works. Idea. Because since the leader Makoto Takahashi planned great battle in the weekly magazine, we can know from the reader survey papers that were sent back that the competition between the 6 new serials in the weekly magazine was quite fierce. Under such circumstances, all the new comic strips published during this period were affected and their popularity dropped, leading the editors of the weekly to make the cruel decision to cut it in half. Therefore, after the big battle in the weekly magazine started, many editors in the weekly editorial department had experienced the situation like editor Aida rejecting a new author. Even Yoshida once made up his mind to reject an author. A cartoonist whose cartoons look interesting. Huh? Fair. Huh, if you really want to say it, weakness is a sin. This was the answer of a middle-class manga artist after Yoshida told Makoto Takahashi about this. The reason for the failure is not because it was affected for no reason, nor is it because we, the participants of Super Smash Bros. Bullied others. Fundamentally speaking, it is because those cartoonists are not strong enough, and those newly serialized comics are not strong enough. Although Takahashi Makoto's statement is a bit exaggerated, Yoshida rarely agrees with such a view. For cartoonists, if a cartoon draft that has been completed diligently and conscientiously is successfully serialized for a long time through a serialization meeting, the energy and time spent before will eventually be compensated in other ways, such as money, such as fame, and then status. However, if the serialization meeting is not passed, or if the series collapses after a certain period of time, for cartoonists, what is lost is not only time and energy, but also what can be called hope, which can also be called hope. Power exists. One general success and 10,000 bones withered. Perhaps as mentioned in the comic Dream Eater, cartoonists are more like gamblers in a sense. The serialized comics were cut in half due to the decline in popularity. After giving the cartoonist the hope of serialization, this hope was shattered. For the cartoonist, this is no longer limited to being described as cruel, right? What is this approach? Is it the ultimate version of true Kiwuwushuan? Speaking of which, the competition between the cartoonists of the Fukuda group is as fierce as ever. Editor Aida did not continue to discuss this topic with Yoshida in depth. He picked up the latest issue of the weekly sample on the table, flipped through it casually, and said to Yoshida meaningfully, "But this enthusiasm, how long can it last?" "Aida-kun, what do you want to say?" "Now that these 6 comics have passed the initial stage of serialization, the next step is to test the cartoonist's control over the comics." Editor Aida put the weekly back on the table and stared at Yoshida seriously. "I'll get straight to the point, Yoshida-kun, do you think there will be a situation where one company dominates?" "Absolutely not," Yoshida gave Editor Aida his own answer without even thinking about it. "Oh my, Yoshida-kun, you are so confident, are you really a man?" "Humph, you still don't understand the true nature of Super Brawl," Yoshida snorted coldly, took out a thick stack of comic ranking statistics from the desk drawer, and said to his colleague Aida slowly with a disdainful tone, "Aiken once said that the reason why this competition between comic works was named Super Brawl is because none of the 6 comics serialized this time can beat the other 5 comics. This week, it may be Hikaru no Go that takes the first place, and next week it may become another comic, so Aida-kun, do you understand? If this continues, the competition between comic works will become more and more intense, and the situation of one dominant company, you said, will never happen." A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 529. Chapter 529. A responsible editor who doesn't want to return to the editorial headquarters early. Regarding the situation that editor Aida speculated that the manga One Punch Man would be the only one in the market, although Yoshida vowed at the time that this was absolutely impossible. As the responsible editor of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, Yoshida really hoped that such a situation would occur from the bottom of his heart. Yoshida's behavior was not a sudden awakening of the attribute of tsundere, but simply showed the worst and most indispensable hypocrisy deep in the root of the human soul. So, although he said something like "this is absolutely impossible," Yoshida, who was quite looking forward to it in his heart, asked this question to a certain Chuyuni cartoonist with so-called hope and fantasy when he routinely collected the comic manuscripts. "Of course it won't happen." "Ah Cheng, there's really no possibility at all." "Huh? Such a weird idea. Speaking of my cat, I never expected that your brain circuits are different from those of ordinary people." A certain Chuyunibu cartoonist didn't even use the power of the devil, but just used the mouth cannon of normal combat power level to shatter Yoshida's fantasy-like hope. "Listen carefully, my cat companion. This battle between us will last for a long time. Therefore, in this long battle, the superiority or inferiority of a moment cannot determine who wins or loses. Now that it has been serialized to the 6th episode, as the editor-in-chief, you should have noticed it more or less, right?" "Noticed? What did you notice?" Yoshida expressed that he could not understand what Takahashi Makoto said. "Of course it is the situation of this big brawl. Tisk, my cat companion, you are an intelligence worker after all, but you didn't even collect the most basic intelligence. You are really useless." Takahashi Makoto despised and mocked Yoshida while speeding up his hand to complete the comic draft. "Although I don't want to interfere with your behavior of getting pleasure from the little sea otter, but, my cat companion, after all, you are also I think I have improved a bit, right? If a person always stays in one position and does not move forward, he will be eliminated by society and the world sooner or later. I don't want to be told that by you, Cheng." Yoshida could not stand the fact that his behavior of enjoying the little otter was completely mastered by a middle school cartoonist. What Yoshida could not stand more was the preaching of Takahashi Makoto just now. Yoshida, with a black face, was flipping through the comics of One Punch Man and roaring with resentment, "Chen, are you qualified to say that to me? You are the one who has not improved at all, okay? Stupid human." When the sarcastic voice sounded, Takahashi Makoto seemed to have just finished the last stroke of the comics. Looking at Yoshida, who was about to enter the edit observation mode, Takahashi Makoto, instead of continuing to draw the comics as usual, he said after a moment of silence, "Hey, my beloved cat, before you observe the comics, what I am going to say next can be regarded as a friendly tip." Makoto, you are going to say? After hearing what Takahashi Makoto said, Yoshida, who had a strong ominous premonition, froze up and stopped flipping through the comics. After a helpless sigh, as if he had prepared himself mentally, he squeezed out his most real reaction at the moment from his teeth with difficulty. "Alas, I think I should be ready to deal with various possible events that may unfold in the future." "Oh, to be able to have such awareness, my beloved cat, I will praise you generously for your current performance." Makoto Takahashi praised Yoshida with a thumbs up, then took out a new manuscript paper from the desk and spread it on the table, and then said something that deserved a beating in a condescending tone. "So as a reward, I decided to wait for you, my beloved cat, to finish reading this comic draft, and then I will talk to you about the friendly tips mentioned earlier." Tisk. I knew it would be like this. Yoshida, who was already familiar with Makoto Takahashi's bad taste, just curled his lips slightly and muttered in a voice that a certain Chuyuni cartoonist could just hear, "Using such tricks every time, do you think I will still be like before, without any progress, and be played around by you? My beloved cat, what you actually want to say is the same trick is useless to me, right?" Makoto Takahashi shook his head gently, with a playful smile on his face. "Using such a euphemism to hide your true intentions, Tisk, I said that it's an uncle-level character, and awakening the tsundere attribute is not cute at all." Yoshida chose to turn a deaf ear to the ridicule of a certain middle school cartoonist, and like an old monk in meditation, he calmly flipped through the manuscript of the 7th episode of One Punch Man in his hand. When Takahashi Makoto saw this, he raised a subtle arc at the corner of his mouth, and did not continue to mock Yoshida for pleasure, but lowered his head to continue to complete the manuscript. The reason why Yoshida was so quickly immersed in the manuscript of the 7th episode of the comic One Punch Man is naturally inseparable from the content of the 6th episode that has been serialized before, because in the previously serialized content, the comic One Punch Man not only has a new curious villain Mosquito Girl, but also added a handsome new character named Genos to the Justice Camp. In the content of the 6th episode, the battle between two new characters is quite exciting, especially Genos, a new character who is visually classified as the Justice Camp, with his cool fighting style, as well as the ferocious fighting power shown in the battle, which was described by a certain second-level cartoonist in 2 chapters, making the readers who observed it extremely excited. However, during the serialization process, a certain middle-class cartoonist did not forget his wicked behavior of gaining pleasure. Obviously Yoshida felt that only 2 chapters were enough to complete the battle and draw the fighting scenes heartily. However, a certain middle-class cartoonist, after finishing 2 chapters, still had no idea the meaning of ending this battle, and actually in the 6th chapter, Genos, who originally had a huge advantage in the previous battle, was crippled by the curious mosquito woman because of his carelessness. What left all observers speechless the most was that just when the curious mosquito girl was about to deliver a fatal blow to Genos, a certain middle-level cartoonist deliberately made the 6th chapter of the comic end here. Regarding the heinous behavior of a certain second-rate cartoonist, not to mention the many readers on the reader side who were itching to hate, even the editors on the editorial side who had been observing the cartoons expressed their dissatisfaction to a certain cartoonist in various ways. The editor-in-chief of a certain tragedy of a secondary cartoonist expressed strong dissatisfaction. Therefore, when many editors on the editorial side obtained the news from Yoshida through various peaceful and friendly methods that the 7th chapter of the comic One Punch Man has been completed, A certain editor took the hopes of his colleagues, immediately rushed to Makoto Takahashi, preparing to receive the manga manuscript for chapter 7. Of course, Yoshida decided to read the 7th chapter with Makoto Takahashi before going back slowly, in addition to wanting to obtain information about tips of kindness from a certain middle-class manga artist. He thought that Yoshida is a conscientious and kind-hearted editor, but he definitely doesn't have such revengeful thoughts as let those who abandon their moral standards in order to observe comics in the past endure the suffering of waiting. Huh? Today's black tea tastes good. Speaking of Cheng, it seems that I haven't attended your tea party for a long time, right? Well, Yoshida really has no idea of revenge against his colleagues. Humph. I'm just a cat, but I dare to talk about tea ceremony with you. I would rather bear the ridicule of a middle-class cartoonist than delay. Yoshida is not a man who turns on the Emma tribute because of hatred. Speaking of Cheng, has the luminous cuisine you studied before already been successful? Hey, speaking of Yoshida-kun, are you really a man who delays your return to the editorial base again and again? Latest update, face covering, sorry. A few days ago, I had an inexplicable tingling in my arm. A certain cat thought that fantasy killer or Kylan arm was about to awaken, but he never expected that it was frozen shoulder. Alas, in short, the lack of updates is the fault of a certain cat. It is sick or something, and it cannot cover up the fact that the update is interrupted. Here, a certain cat sincerely says to all readers. Very sorry to say. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist email. Chapter 530. My beloved cat, do you really want me to cut off your tongue? In response to Yoshida's chattering in an attempt to delay time, a certain middle-class cartoonist stopped drawing and issued a warning with an unkind expression. Or, you feel that your strength has improved recently, so you plan to complete the dungeon mission of single-playing the fierce Demon King of the Phoenix Academy alone. I'm sorry, I got too carried away. Yoshida looked at Makoto Takahashi, who looked unkind, and apologized shamefully and backed down. After snorting coldly, Takahashi Makoto did not continue to entangle with Yoshida, but began to concentrate on drawing the manga, and a certain editor-in-chief Yoshida, who was intimidated by a middle-class cartoonist, observed with concern. After a moment, Takahashi Makoto continued to read the manga manuscript of the 7th chapter of One Punch Man in his hand. According to most, no, it should be said that in 99% of comic settings, beings belonging to the righteous side will definitely defeat the villains from the evil camp, which is the legendary theory of justice will prevail. And Mosquito Girl, who controls a large number of mosquitoes to attack human cities as soon as she appears, is considered to be a villain, so Genos-san, who fights against Mosquito Girl, is naturally positioned as a character in the justice camp. Therefore, Genos should be able to defeat Mosquito Girl and carry out his will of justice must prevail to the end. The first half of the 6th chapter of the original comic One Punch Man was drawn exactly like this. However, in the second half of the 6th episode, Mosquito Girl suddenly used Super Evolution, a crazy blood recovery cheating mode, and coupled with Genos' classmate who had the advantage before, suddenly, like a certain magician family at a specific time dropping the chain, he was careless and underestimated the enemy at the critical moment, and then he was beaten to a semi-crimp by the cheating Mosquito Girl, and even fell into a dangerous situation of being counterattacked. Because a certain middle-class cartoonist stuck the comic at this key position, the real result of the battle will only be confirmed when the 7th chapter is serialized, although neither the readers nor the editors believe that G North will die at the hands of the Mosquito Woman, but before a definite result is obtained, humans will gradually develop a premonition called unknown due to the fermentation of the waiting process, shake their beliefs, and doubt their lives, especially. After considering the bad character of a certain middle-class cartoonist in the past, many people's beliefs have begun to waver. The 7th chapter manga manuscript that Yoshida is holding in his hand at the moment begins with a continuation of the plot of the previous victory or defeat. After the Mosquito Girl cheated, She rushed towards Genos with a killing blow. Genos, who had been crippled, now knew that he was at a disadvantage and decided to choose self-explosion, this method of killing 800 enemies and damaging 1000, and the Mosquito Girl died together. No, it can't be. Genos was obviously so handsome when he appeared on the stage, so he wouldn't really die with his enemies by self-destructing. Regarding the sudden reversal of the battle situation, Yoshida was complaining in his heart, but he was already worried that the plot would develop in a strange direction. Got it? Just at the critical moment when Mosquito Girl was about to deliver her fatal blow and Geno-san was about to self-destruct, a bald man suddenly entered between the two warring parties, but this time, a certain bald male protagonist did not use his fists as usual, but used slap instead. Then after cheating, the Mosquito Girl who beat Genos until she was unable to fight back was suddenly slapped away by a certain bald male protagonist. No, it should be said that she was slapped directly to death. Watching the Mosquito Girl who was so ferocious just now, being slapped to death by a certain bald male protagonist with such a simple and rough slap, this kind of strong contrast, not to mention the open-mouthed look of surprise in Genos' classmate in the comics, even Yoshida, who observed the manga manuscript, was equally shocked. Should I say that a certain bald male protagonist is incredibly strong? Or should I say, appearing at the critical moment is the true way for a hero to appear? Classmate Genos and Mosquito Girl fought hard for nearly 2 chapters. Not only did they not kill Mosquito Girl, they were almost killed in return. However, after a certain bald male protagonist took action, he just slapped her and it ended. Fighting, although we can vaguely infer the power of a certain bald male protagonist from the previous serialized comics, it was only after the battle to kill the Mosquito Girl and the comparison between Genos and his classmates that Yoshida was able to have a real intuitive understanding of the power of a certain bald male protagonist. Tisk, I suddenly feel like my feelings have been deceived. Instead of continuing to observe the manga manuscript, Yoshida curled his lips in dissatisfaction and muttered in a low voice. Don't get me wrong, Yoshida is not dissatisfied with the development of the plot. The reason why Yoshida complained a little depressedly is because he couldn't accept the feeling of the battle ending suddenly. After all, judging from the contents of the previous 2 episodes of the series, the fighting power displayed by Mosquito Girl is still very powerful, especially after recovering blood and cheating. She can suppress and even almost kill Genos' classmate. Originally, Yoshida thought that the Mosquito Girl after cheating could have a fierce battle with a certain bald male protagonist, but who would have thought that a certain bald male protagonist would end the battle with just a slap? It is said that since a certain bald male protagonist can instantly defeat the Mosquito Girl, why does he need to use the content of 2 chapters to foreshadow the strength of the Mosquito Girl? This sudden and pretentious plot unfolds, rather than deceiving the observer's feelings, it's more of a trick, right? Actually. After venting his resentment, Yoshida continued to observe the manga manuscript and suddenly discovered something surprising. The name of a certain bald male protagonist is Saitama? I thought the male protagonist of this comic had no name at all. In the upcoming 7th chapter of the comic One Punch Man, the name of the male protagonist has finally been revealed. Congratulations. Because he had gone through several twists and turns with a middle-class cartoonist before, a certain editor had an obsession with the name of the male protagonist. Now I finally see the name of the male protagonist in the manga manuscript of chapter 7, so Yoshida's obsession has dissipated a lot. As for whether a certain responsible editor is like an urban legend, who can become successful immediately after his obsession dissipates. Buddha, maybe further verification is needed, right? Having resolved his long-standing obsession, Yoshida finally understood his thoughts and continued to read the manga manuscript with a happy mood, preparing to read all the following contents in one go. Originally, Yoshida's plan was not wrong. However, after seeing some inexplicably familiar dialogue in the following plot, Yoshida hesitated again and again, and finally couldn't help but speak. Hey, Cheng. Can you excuse me for a moment? Looking up at Makoto Takahashi, who was quickly completing the manga draft, Yoshida pondered for a moment and then asked his doubts. The second half of Chapter 7, part of the plot, that is, the dialogue between Genos and Saitama, could it be? Oh, my beloved cat, it seems you have noticed it too. Makoto Takahashi seemed to have predicted that Yoshida would ask such a question, so he immediately understood what Yoshida was referring to. It's just as you thought, that's why I was so surprised by Lyosa's performance. It's the same as I thought, huh? Wait. After Yoshida lowered his head and carefully observed the comic manuscript again, a puzzled look appeared on his face, and he asked with some uncertainty, did I hear it wrong, or did Cheng are you wrong? Cheng, you just said that this part of the plot dialogue did not come from the previous conversation between Mr. Jinghe and you, but... Hey, what? It seems that you don't understand my familiar cat. Makoto Takahashi put down his brush, stood up and walked to Yoshida. He pointed at the manga manuscript that Yoshida was struggling with and sighed slowly. You know what happened at that time? I haven't drawn the content of the chapter yet. And that guy Lyosi actually said exactly the same words as Genos in the comic without reading the manga, so I thought Lyosi at the time. Like me, he is an observer whose soul comes from another world. No. I think this is just a coincidence. Yoshida twitched the corner of his mouth in response to a cartoonist's remarks and denied it politely. You are so sweet, my beloved cat. Makoto Takahashi put his hands into the pockets of his white coat and raised his head as if the wisdom of mortals is at the level of ants. There is no such thing in this world. There is no such thing as coincidence, everything is inevitable, there is no mistake, all of this is the choice of Steins Gate. Regarding the arrogant and wanton performance of a certain second-year cartoonist, an editor turned his head. Although there is basically nothing wrong with the content of Chapter 7, I'd better read it again. After all, I am the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine Shounen Jump. I said my companion is a cat. Oh, at this time, a certain middle-class cartoonist originally planned to ridicule Yoshida for such an obvious change of topic, but unfortunately, the mobile phone placed in the pocket of Makoto Takahashi's white coat suddenly vibrated crazily at this moment. Although I don't know who's calling, I'm really grateful. Seeing Makoto Takahashi walking away from him while answering the phone, Yoshida sighed in a low voice. Huh. What an interesting idea. I don't know if it's an illusion. Looking at the inexplicable smile on Takahashi Makoto's face after listening to the phone call for a while, Yoshida suddenly felt a little uneasy. Of course you can. But... After Takahashi Makoto glanced at Yoshida, who was eavesdropping with his ears pricked up, he did not identify the other party, nor did he say any keywords that could infer the truth. If possible, in order to obtain the pleasure that makes my soul marvel, I think I can expand the scope a little. Yeah, you really understand, then, the rest will be left to you. El Psychongru. Cheng, the call just now was. Yoshida asked immediately after seeing Makoto Takahashi ending the call. After all, the so-called pleasure of a middle-class cartoonist is something that Yoshida cares about. Of course he is the mastermind of a certain plan. Makoto Takahashi showed an expectant look on his face, and did not give a positive answer to Yoshida's question. As for what the so-called plan is, don't think that the specific content will be revealed to my subordinate cat, you, the minions of this organization. Drink, ha 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 ha. By the way, the title girl is very difficult to conquer. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 531. Uncle Ding Ding, the conscientious assistant on the assistant side, came to the Reading Work Phoenix Court Kyoma manga studio early in the morning to write Takahashi Makoto's house, and found that a certain Chuyunibun cartoonist had his hands crossed and rested his chin, with a look of regret that even if tomorrow is the end of the world, I will still be like this. No, it should be said that he had a paralyzed expression. Uncle Ding Ding suddenly felt that he seemed to have drawn the legendary great misfortune today. That, Chang, what happened? Although he knew that he shouldn't speak out to break the silence, Uncle Ding Ding couldn't help but ask, could it be, there is something wrong with the 7th chapter of the comic book One Punch Man? No, it's not like that, Ding Ding Ji-san. I just... Takahashi Makoto put down his hands, stood up and pulled his white coat. The expression on his face finally eased. After hesitating for a moment, he sighed in a very melancholy tone, I just felt the malice from the world, that's all. Ah Cheng is like this now, is it the rare conversation ends at middle school mode that editor Yoshida often talks about? Indeed, it feels like it's hard to continue the conversation. Let's not talk about how cruel the editor-in-chief had instilled in Uncle Tintin, but looking at Takahashi Makoto's appearance at the moment, and recalling Yoshida's almost tearful complaint before, Uncle Tintin suddenly had such an understanding at the moment. Could this be what scientists call the precursor of the awakening of biological instincts? I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network rightward arrow. Looking at Takahashi Makoto's obvious unwillingness to continue explaining, Uncle Tintin made a complaint in his heart, and was very rational and sensible. He did not break the casserole to find out the truth like a certain editor who was looking for death, but quietly picked up the comic manuscript he should have completed and prepared to start today's assistant work. Although a certain middle school cartoonist looked like he was worried at the moment, Uncle Tintin still did not calmly complete his work, and had no intention of intervening at all. There is nothing wrong with doing this. First of all, this is not a strategy game. You can take advantage of Takahashi Makoto's busy schedule to improve his favorability or intimacy by caring and comforting him, so as to achieve the purpose of strategy and push. After all, a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist is not a soft girl, and people like Uncle Ding Ding, who have a family, have never had any gay thoughts? Secondly, although the time spent with Takahashi Makoto is not long or short, Uncle Ding Ding has witnessed many times the behavior of a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist who pleases Yoshida and other people as an assistant, so for the behavior of a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist this time, Uncle Ding Ding, who has a strange premonition that if you touch him, you will definitely be cheated to death, in order to avoid getting himself into more trouble, follows his intuition or instinctive prompts and warnings, and chooses the safest way of skipping the conversation and going straight to work. Finally, today, Uncle Ding Ding did not see any existence who could lend a helping hand when he was in trouble. According to a certain editor, if you don't want to be regarded as a humanoid creature that can provide pleasure by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, it is best not to talk about anything or any person when you are alone with Makoto Takahashi. When people concentrate on completing something, time always flies away quickly, but for Uncle Ding Ding, who has always been vigilant against a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, today, not even the morning time, can be described as a year. Speaking of which, the great existence who proposed the theory of relativity must have experienced similar events in the past, right? I wonder if the plan will go smoothly. Although a certain Chuyuni cartoonist whispered softly, Uncle Ding Ding still heard it very clearly in the quiet and somewhat depressing studio. Although he was a little curious about what the so-called plan in Makoto Takahashi's mouth was, Uncle Ding Ding, who was seriously completing the comic manuscript, did not indulge in his curiosity like a certain editor and cause all kinds of unfortunate human disasters. Tisk, the agreed meeting time hasn't come yet? If I had known this would happen, I might as well have moved it up 2 hours, but if I move the agreed time up, I won't have time to finish the comic, a middle school cartoonist complained while drawing a comic. Agreed meeting? Who did he make an appointment with? Although it was just a brief doubt that made his brush pause for a blink of an eye, Uncle Ding Ding immediately felt the eyes of a middle school cartoonist on him. At that moment, it was like being topped by a dangerous predator, the kind of feeling that came from biological instinct, or the inheritance of fear of the name natural enemy in the genes, not only the body, but even the soul began to tremble. Don't be curious. Don't ask questions. Don't respond kindly out of curiosity or to avoid embarrassment to someone. Huh? Is it this time already? Then, it's almost time to prepare that. He he he. A middle school cartoonist tried to attract Uncle Ding Ding's attention with a rather annoying laugh. He turned his back on what was going on around him and concentrated on completing the comic manuscript. Uncle Tintin, who was on full alert, was able to temporarily resist the mental attack from the devil. Eavesdropping on the planner, obliterate. Anyone who snitches to the editor, obliterate. Well, the preparation work has been completed, and when all the people are here, it will be time for the much-loved dungeon. Although Takahashi Makoto published this after the words that seemed to be talking to himself, there was complete silence, but, Uncle Tintin had already understood the meaning that a certain second-grade cartoonist wanted to express from some cruel words. Well, Cheng, I have something to do at home today, so I need to go back early. Huh? What's going on at home? Do you plan to accompany your child to Namek for martial arts training? Regardless of whether he answered yes or no at this time, Uncle Tintin felt a certain pain in a place that cannot be described. Okay, Makoto Takahashi looked up at the clock on the wall, focused his attention on the comic manuscript on Uncle Tintin's desk, and asked slowly, speaking of Tintin-ji-san, your progress bar over there, how many % have you read? All right, there are still about 10 pages left. It's not that Uncle Tintin is efficient at work, the precise statement is that it's because a certain second-grade cartoonist has almost completed the cartoon manuscript before, and he really needs an assistant to complete it. There are not many parts. About 10 pages. Time is a little tight. Makoto Takahashi curled his lips, and after his eyes lingered on Uncle Tintin for a moment, he let out a long sigh. If it can't be completed, I'll leave the rest to you. Me. Chen, are you really a man like this? Hearing this, Ding Ding Ji-sang raised his head and looked at Makoto Takahashi in surprise. By the way, I remember that Aiken, you seem to be responsible for not only completing One Punch Man starting from this month and White Rabbit Candy manga manuscripts, and also be responsible for taking over the Railgun manga from Arizuma-sensei, right? Well, there is nothing wrong with that. This demon mercifully allows you to speak your mind today and forgives you. So, Tintin-ji-san, do you have any suggestions? Before that, I can ask you, Cheng, your so-called plan. Although he had already felt the murderous intention from Takahashi Cheng, Uncle Ding Ding still had the courage to ask, well, compared to a certain for the timid and unscrupulous editor, Uncle Ding Ding is a real man. Could it be that you plan to add a new serial to the weekly or monthly magazine? No, there is no such plan yet. Makoto Takahashi shook his head to deny Uncle Tintin's conjecture, and then showed a devilish smile. Hey, Tintin-ji-san, if you are curious about the next plan. No, I'm just worried about whether the workload will increase, that's all. Hey, seeing that Uncle Tintin didn't fall into the trap at all, a certain middle-level cartoonist smacked his lips in displeasure and muttered in a low voice, it seems that Tintin-ji-san's ranking is higher than that of my dependent in terms of vigilance and defensiveness. The cat is taller. Although Takahashi Makoto did not disclose the agreed time, Uncle Tintin, who had passed by danger several times today, did not seem to have exhausted all his luck. He had already evacuated the dangerous area before the agreed time. At the same time, it also avoids the possibility of being dragged into the plan by a middle-class cartoonist. Well, it seems that there are a lot of participants this time. Looking at the people sitting around the table, Takahashi Makoto nodded with satisfaction, and praised the new wife Ag beside him. It took such a short time. Here, we have gathered such participants, shouldn't we say that they are not the king of Black Flame? It's a pity that Hiromaru-sensei didn't come to say. Eiji Naizumo lowered his head in a depressed tone and kept poking at the table with his fingers. Don't worry about this. Because according to this plan, the little sea otter seems to lack the opportunity to join, and more importantly, in order to lure my familiar cats away, we must prepare some bait. Looking at the confusion of several people around, with his eyes, Takahashi Makoto explained the reason why the little sea otter didn't come. So let the little sea otter stay behind and use any method to hold back my cat. This is my oracle to the little sea otter. Suddenly I feel sympathy for Mr. Hiromaru. After listening to Takahashi Makoto's explanation, except for Eiji Naiizuma, everyone present showed sympathetic expressions on their faces. After all, how does Yoshida usually treat the little sea otter? Everyone here has heard about it. So, Mr. New Wife, what exactly do you want to say when you summon all of us here to Aiken? A certain yellow hair asked after pushing up his glasses. If you look carefully, isn't this yellow hair, is Yachin Mumenjai the yellow-haired glasses guy in the gay duo? Of course it's about the teacher's new series. Eiji Shinzuma had a look of anticipation on his face. After a slight pause, he glanced at everyone and said with great interest, and about the new duel method. A new way of dueling, except for Makoto Takahashi who remained silent. Several people on the side of the cartoonist had unexpected looks on their faces. Mr. Yashiro Mumha, Mr. Fukuda, and Mr. Shizukawa, although our comics are of different types, the only way to determine the winner is through the results of the reader survey, but such a duel is a bit boring. It's not that Nizuma Eiji forgot to mention Takahashi Makoto, but because a certain Chuyuni cartoonist has already seen through the whole plan. No, the correct statement should be that the person who dragged the cartoonists into the plan was Takahashi Makoto. So, based on a common point between several comics, I thought of a new way to compete. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 532. For the two comics One Punch Man and My Hero Academia, since they were serialized, editors and many readers have complained about such things as the worldview settings are too similar and the weirdness of the characters is very similar. However, despite the complaints, although the two comics are very similar in the eyes of editors and readers, from the content that has been published so far, both editors and readers have to admit that the styles of these two comics are completely different. The plot development model adopted by the comic My Hero Academia is naturally the most popular and classic inspirational development model in the Weekly Shonen Jump. The male protagonist starts from a useless and even talentless waste, and gradually grows into a talent after various adventures and the accumulation of time. Although this routine is a bit old and seems a bit outdated, it cannot be denied that the development model adopted by the comic is easier to capture the hearts of readers. Take the popular manga Naruto in the Weekly Shonen Jump for example. I believe everyone who observes the manga Naruto still remembers what kind of existence Naruto was in the early days. Idiot, stupid, and optimistic on the surface, but because of the various exclusions from the people in the village, he is a very lonely boy in his heart. He strives to become a Hokage, not to become a great or even amazing person, but just to get the recognition of the people in the village and the care of his partners. When readers just started to observe this manga, how many readers sneered at this childish and only knows how to make trouble to get attention male protagonist. But as the subsequent plot of the manga gradually unfolds, it turns out that the boy who only knows how to play pranks all day will work hard to practice in order to save his good friends, and will fight desperately to protect his companions in the village. Even though he still does some things that make people smile sometimes, under the witness of many readers, Naruto is working hard and moving towards his goal step by step. Frustration, hardship, recognition, expectation, responsibility. After experiencing the test called life, Naruto gradually grew from a little kid who liked to play pranks to a trusted partner and a Hokage that everyone expected. For readers who have observed the entire process of Naruto's growth, everything that Naruto encountered during his growth process has more or less happened to themselves or others. When the protagonist was still weak, the readers had just encountered this comic, and when the protagonist began to work hard and make progress, the readers who have been observing the comic from a god's perspective, the readers of the comics are not just observing the comics, but as a bystander, they witness the efforts and progress of the protagonists, and witness the growth of the protagonists. When the protagonists gradually become stronger and can defeat the opponents that they could not defeat before, the readers who have been observing the protagonists will instantly feel a sense of satisfaction that my child has grown up. Although the dimensions are different and the worlds they live in are different, the experience of accompanying and witnessing the growth of the protagonists will become an unforgettable memory, engraved in the depths of the soul, and unforgettable for every reader. Therefore, the content observed by the readers is not limited to comics, but more of witnessing other people's lives, and their own growth. And this is also the reason why this classic but somewhat outdated routine is so enduring. But the style of the comic One Punch Man is obviously not this classic routine. The bald male protagonist appeared with almost invincible fighting power at the beginning. Apart from the from ordinary bones to cheats level of memories, the comic One Punch Man has not much content to dig deep in terms of the plot. No matter what kind of enemy, it only takes one punch to solve it. This plot development mode, this comic setting concept, may be very novel and unique at the beginning, so that readers will have a feeling such as this comic is very interesting. However, this development mode cannot last too long. After all, if the plot of each episode develops like this, and the content of each episode is that the bald teacher Saitama appears and takes care of the enemy with one punch, then over time, this comic that is familiar to readers will also gradually lose its appeal. So there is the appearance of Genos in the comic, the existence of the hero association, and the appearance of various cool and powerful or weak monsters. These characters in the comic can not only enrich the plot of the comic itself, but also set the stage for the appearance of Saitama teacher. After all, the concept of strength is relative. If you want to distinguish the difference between the strong and the weak, the easiest way is to compare the two. In order to express how powerful Saitama is, the easiest way is to let Saitama kill those enemies that others have to fight hard or even cannot defeat with one punch. Of course, according to the words of a responsible editor, every time, after the reader's appetite is whetted, Saitama will suddenly appear and then kill the opponent with a domineering punch. This speechless mode setting must be deliberately done by a middle school cartoonist who wants to get pleasure by teasing the readers. So if there are similarities between Makoto Takahashi's One Punch Man and Eiji Naizuma's My Hero Academia, the cartoonists said they can understand. After all, no matter the subject matter or the worldview, there are certain similarities between the two cartoons, but please don't forget that the scope that Eiji Naizuma just mentioned is the cartoons of all the cartoonists present. The comics Hikaru no Go by Yashiro Mumanji, Assassination by Shizukawa, and JoJo by the silver-haired guy Fukuda, these three comics have different styles and themes, and the way the comic plot unfolds is not the classic routine commonly seen in the weekly Shonen Jump. The protagonist of the comic Hikaru no Go is a chess player, the protagonist of the comic Assassination is an assassin, and the protagonist of JoJo is a martial arts faction, and the protagonist of Hikaru no Go is a little boy who can see ghosts, and the protagonist of Assassination is Hideyoshi of unknown gender. As for the protagonist of JoJo, a muscular brother, it is completely different from the previous two comics, right? And Hikaru no Go is an inspirational comic like Dream Eater. Assassination often satirizes some social cruelty in the joyful daily life, and it can barely be regarded as an everyday comic. But what about JoJo? This is not an inspirational or everyday comic, right? According to the definition of comics in Weekly Shonen Jump, this comic is definitely a passionate comic, for sure. So, in short, these three comics are completely different types, and it is a bit forced to even involve them together, let alone have any common points. Speaking of which, Eiji Naizuma, who can find common points between these three comics and One Punch Man and My Hero Academia, must have a different brain circuit structure than others, right? No wonder Eiji Naizuma can be close friends with Makoto Takahashi. A guy who can become close friends with a certain Chuyunibu cartoonist, is not a normal existence in itself?